Hey, Paul. And everybody else, welcome to 10 a.m. How we doing? Somebody's going to heaven over here. Hey, I hope you're doing well, and if we've not met, my name's Forrest, and I'm on the team here at Neighborhood, and we are in the middle of this series, Reset, and we're asking some questions. And we're trying to answer these questions. And it's really kind of twofold. We want to look at how we can sort of unlock our potential as an extended spiritual family that we call Neighborhood Church. And so we're asking the question, how can I help? Right? How can we together, right? Because there are just some things we need to do together if we want a church that we love, that we want a church that we kind of, yeah, that was awesome, that was great, I love dropping my kids off, all those things. If we want a church where we feel comfortable inviting our friends and family and coworkers to, there's just some things we all need to do together. And so we've been asking the question, how can I help, right? How can I help? In fact, there was a story I was reminded of this week that really illustrated the how can I help sort of principle that I thought I would bring today to share with you. And it's actually kind of a super sad, tragic story, but I think it makes my point. So my point isn't to depress you, although I might, but it is to say, hey, this is why the how can I help question is so important. And it's a story that actually goes all the way back to 1964, New York City, Queens, actually. And it's the story of a young woman named Kitty Genovese. And she was stabbed to death in Queens in 1964. She was chased by an assailant. She was attacked by the same assailant 3 separate times on a street over the course of 30 minutes, ultimately costing her life. And while that's tragic enough, what's even more tragic is that 38 of her neighbors watched from their windows. For the entire half-hour ordeal, not one of the 38 came to Kitty's aid. They didn't come to her rescue. They didn't shout out. They didn't even bother to pick up the phone to call the police. And honestly, it's hard for me to even imagine people behaving that way. And I think it's easy for us to maybe rationalize and go, well, that was like 1964, bunch of hippies, whatever. Okay, I mean, some of you were hippies, right? And, right, I mean, it's New York, of course, that kind of stuff happens over there all the time, right? Obviously, this is a one-time deal, but here's the thing, not a one-time deal. I mean, this is the type of story that happens again and again and again in cities and towns all over the world, all the time, right? Situations like the Kitty Genovese situation is not one time. It's very, very common, which of course leads to people starting to ask, why? Why do people just stand around and watch instead of help? And it actually led to a couple of New York City psychologists. One was a professor and researcher at Columbia, the other at NYU, and they decided they wanted to dig deeper in what ultimately would be coined the Bystander Problem. And in a fascinating kind of series of studies, these two psychologists decided that they would stage a series of emergencies of different types in different settings to see who would come to help, right? And here's what they discovered in all of these studies. There's really just one factor. There's one factor that determines if somebody will help or not. And it wasn't the severity of the crisis. It wasn't the degree to which the person was screaming, how loud, how emphatic, anything like that. It wasn't the characteristics of the person. It had nothing to do with their race. It had nothing to do with young or old or attractive or not attractive, male or female. None of that had anything to do with whether or not people showed up to help. The only thing that mattered, they discovered, was how many people witnessed the event. That's the only thing that mattered. And here's what they learned. The more people who were around, the fewer people responded. The more people who were watching the event, almost guaranteed less people or no people would ultimately respond. In fact, in one experiment, they had a person kind of stage an epileptic fit. And in one study, they just had one person sort of be the witness to this event. And when it was just one person, 85% of the time, that one person went to the aid of the person with the epileptic fit. But when they had 4 or more people witnessing the fit, that number 85 went down to 31%. More people watching, less people responding. From 85% to 31%. I mean, after all, the chances it would seem would be more likely. In fact, there's more people. And the psychologist said, you would think that, but that's not the case. Because what happens in large groups is quite interesting. The larger the group, the more likely it is that the sense of personal responsibility gets spread out, right? What they discovered, these psychologists, what they discovered is when people are in a group, responsibility for taking personal action gets diffused. It gets watered down. So the larger the group, the less likely it is that people will take action, because we just assume, right, somebody else will make the call. Somebody else will report the problem, right? Somebody else will respond to that person in need. Or what happens is we just believe that because no one else is acting, the apparent problem isn't really that big of a problem, because if it were, then other people would respond. Look at how many people are watching this thing, right? And in the case of Kitty Genovese, the lesson the psychologist would tell us isn't that no one called for help even though 38 people heard her scream. No. The lesson is that no one called because 38 people heard her scream. In other words, and here's what's super tragic, if she'd been attacked on a lonely street with just one witness, in all likelihood, Kitty would still be alive. Because that one person would have felt a sense of obligation to respond. They would have been moved by the fact that it was literally up to them to solve this problem. Now, I bring that story up in the context of this question, how can I help? Because I think there's a lesson we can learn as a church together. Because if it's true that the larger the crowd, the more that personal responsibility gets spread out and diffused and watered down, then that means in any large group setting, like our church, there's several hundred of you just in this service, right? That a church like ours, a big church, we're at risk of people losing a sense of personal, individual responsibility. Right? Because it's rather easy in a church this size for us to get to the place where we just come and we sit and we enjoy and we benefit and we receive and we appreciate and we consume, but we never sort of feel or sense this personal responsibility for responding to the needs in our midst. And we show up every week, and every week it's like, wow, everything's taken care of. The property always looks amazing. There's always people that I can drop my kids off with. Everything's just humming along. It's running smoothly. And if a need is made known by that guy on the stage, well, look at all these people. Somebody will respond. I don't need to. In fact, it's so easy for us to get to the place where that idea of this thing and the health of this thing that we call neighborhood church actually depending on me, it never even crosses our mind. The idea that I'm important to the health and success of this thing, right? That what I do matters. Well, in a group this size, science tells us that may never make it to our awareness. And it's not because you're a jerk. And it's not because you don't care. It's because in large groups like ours, it's just easy to get to the place where we don't feel like we have any personal responsibility to act, right? We find ourselves with someone else will do it, sort of that kind of attitude. And it's just how groups work. And so we constantly need to sort of be reminding ourselves, let's not let ourselves be lulled to sleep. Right? And now all of a sudden we're just a church filled with witnesses to the event rather than the type of people who will run out and help. So we ask the question every once in a while, how can I help? How can I not be a witness, but rather be a participant, a solution to whatever the problem may be? That's why we're really doing this series and this how can I help question. And the interesting thing about this and what's so incredible about all of this is we said, listen, over 4 weeks we want to answer this question, how can I help? But we don't want it to just be that, hey, we need something from you. That's not really the point. Yes, it's true. We all need to do this together if it's going to be the church we want it to be. But the amazing thing about how the local church works and how Jesus works is that the answer to the question, how I can help, is also the answer to the question, how can I grow? That if you're committed to growth within a framework of Jesus, that means you're also committed to the us. If you're committed to you and your growth, that means you're committed to us. And you being committed to us is you being committed to you. That how you can help us is how you help you. It's a win-win. It's just how the local church is set up. It's just how Jesus set the whole thing up. A healthy us actually creates a healthy you, and a healthy you helps create a healthy us. And I was thinking about it this week that I was reminded of a story. It comes from World War II, and a church got bombed. Lots of churches got bombed, but this particular church that got bombed had a statue of Jesus. And the statue of Jesus actually got not totally destroyed, but harmed, let's say, in the bombing. And the hands and feet of Jesus were blown off. And it's interesting, there's a story of a soldier who finds the statue, and he sees the Jesus fallen over with no hands and feet, and so he kind of leans it up against the wall, and he's trying to figure out how to repair the statue of Jesus, and he just can't. He can't repair it, and he's starting to get frustrated, and he's starting to get disappointed, and he's about to walk away, but as he turns to walk away, a thought dawns on him, and he, instead of trying to repair it, he stops trying to repair it, and he just writes these words on the bottom of the statue. Speaking from the perspective of Jesus, this soldier wrote, "I have no hands but your hands, and no feet but your feet." What the soldier was doing, he's sort of echoing something that was actually written a couple thousand years before he ever bumped into this statue. A man named Paul was writing a letter to some Jesus people in an ancient city called Corinth, and he's trying to give them a picture of what the local church is, and he's trying to help them understand how it all works, and he writes these words, "Now you," and the you here, remember the Bible didn't fall out of the sky, written in English, right? Paul wrote in Greek, and you here is plural. It's y'all, maybe, right? It's you all. Now you all, or y'all, right, are the body. That collectively, you make up the body. And individually, you're a member of it. Again, it's this, how can I help the body be healthy? But for the body to be healthy, I need to be healthy because I'm part of it. That's just how the local church works. And ultimately, we're not just any random body, but we are to represent the physicalness of Jesus in the world, that we, in fact, are together and individually his hands and feet. This was the image handed to the movement Jesus started nearly 2,000 years ago. That you unlocking your potential helps us unlock our potential, and us unlocking our potential helps you unlock your potential. It's why I say so often that Christianity is this we faith. It is a together, that we are a part of this thing. Call it an extended family, call it a body, call it a church, whatever you want, that there's this connectedness about us first. But that connectedness leads to a healthy me. Maybe we could say it like this, that we need you, but you need us. That's just how this thing works. It's this win-win win-win relationship. And in this series, we've said again and again, there are 4 primary responses to those questions. How can I help and how can I grow? Again, these responses, they answer both the questions. How can I help and how can I grow? And we started and we said the first one was just to practice living beyond yourself. Practice making it not about you. And the environment we create here to help you with that and to help us impact the world, we just do these monthly 4 projects, and Jordan already mentioned it in the video, right? Right now we're partnering with Sleep in Heavenly Peace, and you guys just keep bringing pillows and blankets and beds and bags and all of that. And here's the thing, this is a Kitty Genovese moment. You can see all of those and go, well, I don't need to go. I've been busy this week. Or you can see all of those and go, no, I'm not going to just witness this and be glad that I'm a part of a church that did something while I did nothing. Or after church, you go to Target and you buy a bed and a bag. We've talked about this. You're already going to waste several $100s this month. Go at Target just one time, go and buy something for someone else, right? And then you'll feel good about wasting all that other money, right? And so we said, listen, how we become the kind of church that we love, well, we need to make sure it's actually not about us as a church, but that we're using the us to impact the world. But when you practice that as an individual, Jesus uses that to blow your faith up, and you slowly become the kind of person that you were created to be, this generous, compassionate, loving, connected human being. And so that was week 1. And then last week, again, we just said, help out, right? Right? And this is how we make sure as a church that our reputation out in the community, and we have a great reputation out in the community. Everybody loves, neighborhood, they do so much, right? But the helping out piece is how we make sure our reputation in the community and our health back home stay in alignment, right? And when we take personal responsibility for the health of neighborhood and we find a service team to help out on, not only does it keep us healthy, but it grows you. It's a catalyst that Jesus leverages to grow your faith. And if you missed last week or you just needed some more time to sort of marinate on it, but now I've told you the whole Kitty Genovese story, and now you're like, oh, geez, I better help out, right? The seat back's in front of you. The helping out, find a service team card is in there, and you can take it to the tent after the service if you're still sort of on the fence, and they can walk you through all sorts of next steps. And so that leads us to this week. And we're just calling it Stay Connected. And honestly, this is really more about the how can I grow than it is the how can I help. This is about us at Neighborhood creating spaces where we think you're most likely to grow. That we create spaces where you can stay connected in smaller groups together. That you can, in this sort of larger church, that you can have this, what's sort of the cool buzzword for community these days? Tribe or something, right? That you can sort of have your tribe, your people, that's really important to your health. There's a thing couples that are engaged that want to get married, they come to me and they say, hey, will you marry us? And I said, well, yeah, but we need to sit down and talk over a few things. And one of the things I'm constantly telling these couples when they come is that your marriage is only as healthy as you are. That if you want a healthy marriage, you need to be healthy as an individual. You need to do your work. You need to figure out what's going on with you. You need to confront some of your own shadow side and your demons, right? You need to go after that stuff because the health of your marriage, in fact, depends on it. Your well-being is what will contribute most to a thriving, healthy marriage. And that's kind of how staying connected works in a local church. Right? You being intentional about community and finding a tribe and getting your people, right? You being intentional about that is you going after your own well-being and your own growth, but your growth as an individual gives us the ability as an organization, as a local church, as a family, as a body, to thrive. And here's why all of this is so important. There was no way we couldn't talk about staying connected. It's because, and we've said this so much, God has literally designed us for relationships. We are meant to have a tribe. We are meant to have a family. We're meant to have a people group. That's not hundreds in a room where we're staring at the back of people's heads. but rather us turning our chairs to face each other, know each other, hear each other, be heard by each other. We've said it like this: you just can't follow Jesus in isolation. If you care about your growth at all, if you care about unlocking your potential, you can't do it by yourself. Christianity is just inherently a team sport, and that's true even for you introverts in the room. Right? And the early followers of Jesus, they had this phrase that they would just use all the time, particularly that guy, Paul, I mentioned earlier, but all of the authors, they just underscore this idea that following Jesus is this hyper-relational activity. And Paul in particular, again and again and again, he uses this phrase, one another, to talk about what it feels like to be connected in community. And the things that we do to practice being in community, right? And here's what this is just a short list of the longer list of one another's that Paul talks about, that we're to forgive one another, accept one another, care for one another, encourage one another, submit to one another, restore one another, carry one another's burdens, bear with one another. That's code for just like put up with that annoying person in your group, right? This is again and again and again. If you just open the Christian scripture, we call it the New Testament, you're not going to get very far before you see that phrase, one another. And you may think, well, I thought the whole Christian thing was, show up at church. That's pretty good. Show up at church and, say a prayer sometimes, drop the few bucks and the, things on the wall, and I'm good. And I think Paul would say, what? What is that? Because it's not following Jesus, because for Paul, it was all about one another's, and you can't one another all by yourself. You can't one another in rows, staring at the back of each other's heads, listening to some Bible answer man. And you shouldn't try. You shouldn't even try to do it, because when you do that, when you just say, I'm going to isolate, I'm doing my own thing, I don't need anybody, I've tried this small group thing for us, stop it, it's just been a nightmare. If you just say, I'm done, the problem with being done with that is that you're now actually opposing, not just talk about it in divine terms, like the will of God or whatever. No, you're actually opposing the will of how the universe has been designed. I have a buddy, he's been a friend of mine for a long time, and he's just freaky smart. You have freaky smart friends? I have some freaky smart friends, and this guy in particular is just always into weird stuff, and he comes, and we were on the phone the other day, he kind of lives far away, and he says to me, Forrest, what do you know about quantum physics? I'm like, nothing? Less than nothing? I didn't even take regular physics in high school. Right? I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. He's like, I'm going to tell you all about it. I said, good luck. But I was so blown away by what he said. I'm going to teach you what I don't really know today, right? So here's what he said, my buddy Ron. He said this. He said, when it comes to quantum physics, it's really just all about how the things that make up atoms, so the things that are smaller than atoms, work. Quantum physics tries to make sense of how the smallest things in nature work. And one of the laws governing quantum physics is called the Law of Entanglement. And the Law of Entanglement says that, and this relationship should be capitalized, highlighted, different color, whatever. Law of Entanglement says that relationship is the defining characteristic of everything in space and time. Relationship. That's the defining characteristic that quantum physics says everything and everyone is linked together, that everything and everyone affects each other, right? So quantum physicists, this is all they do. They try to figure out exactly how entangled we are. And what they've discovered is just insane to me, right? They said, listen, at a quantum level, we're so deeply entangled, so deeply embedded with each other that even just our intentions, right, impact our DNA molecules and the DNA molecules of the people in our proximity. Quantum physicists say our connection to each other is literally hardwired in us. You can't not connect. The only choice is, are you going to be healthy when you do it or not healthy when you do it? Quantum physicists talk about the law of entanglement. Paul just called it one another, right? When we connect with people and say intentionally, I'm going to have a group of people that I'm just going to be intentional about meeting. When I do that, look, you guys know where this is going, right? In a few minutes, I'm going to be like, sign up for a small group. You already know, right? So just get ready, right? I mean, so I'm doing all this, but this is where we're going. So just deal with it right now, right? So quantum physics says it's so much more than like being in a Bible study and like meeting once a month or twice a month or once a week or whatever with a group of people. It's like, no. When you are intentional about community, what you're doing is you are aligning with how the universe works right down to the smallest particles known to man, right? I mean, here's what quantum physicists have determined. That genuine positive emotion directed intentionally towards another person literally changes how our DNA strands coil and uncoil. Are you kidding me? That our positive, right? You've seen those like hats and shirts that just say good vibes only, right? There's something to that. Right? I mean, there just is. I mean, quantum physicists say, yes, good vibes only. Because they would even say this, even as little as 30 seconds a day of good vibed intentionality towards another person changes how your DNA coils and uncoils. In fact, they say it doesn't just change in that moment. That your commitment to be sending good vibes, positive vibes, intentionally towards other people, not only will impact your own destiny, but will impact the destiny of the next 3 generations. Don't talk to me after the service or email me and say, how, Forrest? Because I already told you, I'm only telling you literally everything I know. I have no idea how. I just think quantum physicists probably know what they're talking about. 30 seconds a day changes your destiny and impacts the next 3 generations worth of destiny. Quantum physicists call it entanglement. Paul called it one another. Right? That's it. This is how the world works. This is just another cool thing I discovered, that our brains are even wired for this law of entanglement. We have all kinds of different neurons running around in our head, but the coolest of all neurons, the fastest of all neurons, are called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons are so cool because they actually operate outside of our 5 senses. You're never gonna feel a mirror neuron. It's never gonna create this emotion you can talk about, but they operate outside of our 5 senses and they're talking to each other. Your mirror neurons are talking to the mirror neurons next to you, to the person next to you. And here's what it's doing. They're talking to each other, and now your body temperatures are starting to align to like the 10th of a degree. Your mirror neurons are talking to each other, and you're able to predict the next movement of the person sitting next to you, right? That you can feel what they're feeling. That mirror neurons are the heartbeat of what we call empathy. And that there's this weird extra, did you know that we have this weird extrasensory thing happening all the time? And it's because we're entangled. We're deeply embedded with each other. And even 30 seconds of intentional positivity towards another person changes the world. Paul just called it one another. Right? And when we intentionally decide to isolate, to say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't really like people. Nobody really likes, listen, I mean, come on. The vast majority of your conversations are just talking about the person that annoyed you right before you got to the person you're having lunch with. Right? I mean, come on. Nobody likes people. And everybody's annoyed by people. But when we say that's my excuse for not being intentional about relationships, what you're doing is, I would say, you're kind of on purpose saying, I'm going to push against the way the universe, which I would argue is divinely designed. But you're also pushing against your path towards a more Jesus-shaped life. Let me just show you. There's a really long sermon, not quite as long as the one you're getting today, but a decently long sermon in the Christian scripture, our New Testament. We don't know who wrote it. They're anonymous, but we just call it today the book of Hebrews. And I just a couple sentences from the book of Hebrews today kind of show you, I think, how the early Christians kind of thought about this one another and this idea that we're entangled together and we were designed for relationship and all of that. Here's how this anonymous author talked about it. He said, and let us consider how we may spur one another on. That word spur is so interesting. Remember, just like Paul, he wrote in Greek, the author of Hebrews also wrote in Greek. And the word spur, it literally means, let us consider how we may irritate one another, right? That we may stir it up in each other's lives, that we would provoke each other, that we'd have that kind of relationship with each other. Where you're in such close proximity with each other that when you see a friend drifting, you have access to that friend and you can say, hey, what's with the drifting? Right? Or you see that couple that's struggling and you have access to that couple and you can say, hey, what's going on? Can we come alongside you? Or you see your friend's son or daughter beginning to drift, and it appears to you that mom and dad aren't aware of the drift, and you have access to that son or daughter, and you can come to them and say, hey, what's going on? I know maybe you don't want to talk to mom or dad, but will you talk to me? Right? It was interesting. I've already told you in this series that Emma's a freshman now, and so, I'm going to a lot of therapy and not doing well with it at all. And, I don't like conversations that begin with, hey, Dad, this boy asked for my number. I'm like, what's his name? Anyway. But it was interesting, Emma, she plays tennis, and, Katie was sending out to our tribe. Hey, just so you know, Emma's got her first tennis match today, or, whatever. And so I think it's maybe third day of school. I pick Emma up from school, and how is it? And she's continually mesmerized by, the massiveness that is lunch at Redwood High's campus, right? And just all the humans. And and I tried to give her the whole we're entangled quantum physics thing, and she's like, shut up with that. But so I practiced before I came to you. Did not work on 14-year-olds, so I'm hoping I get a better... But I said, how was your day? And she's like, Dad, you know what I learned today? She's like, I learned there's always someone looking after me. I said, well, what? What do you mean? There's people watching you? Are these creepers, stalkers? She said, no, so Katie had sent out these text messages to some friends or whatever, and they started texting Emma. Good luck, I hope your day, she's getting all of these texts all day long. And her response to that was, I feel like there's always someone looking after me. And my heart, I was like, yes! If there's anything I want my 14-year-old who's lost in the sea that is the quad or whatever it's called at Redwood, right? That I want her to know, it's that she is looked at, that people are thinking about her, that are caring about her, that mom and dad are talking about her, and it's impacting how others are. That's what I want, and that's what the author of Hebrews is getting at. Irritate each other to the point that your kids know, that your friends' kids know, someone's always looking after them. That I want you to be in relationship with each other in such a way that you're able to spur each other on, like positively, right? Again, those good vibes. Right? And again, it's not always going to go well. I mean, come on, I don't want to oversell this thing. We all have conflict. You're going to be in relationship with people. You're going to have a tribe, and you're going to feel like you need to say something, and then you go home and you talk about it, and you go back and forth. Should I say, and then maybe you say something, and it gets a little sideways for a minute. I mean, that's just called human, right? It's okay, right? But I think what the author of Hebrews is saying, I just want you to be connected that way, but for a reason, so that you help each other follow Jesus, essentially, that you help each other figure out how to love and to live beyond yourself, this good deeds idea that you're in each other's lives to the point, we've talked about this, that your faith goes from belief to action, that Jesus didn't really invite very many people to believe in him, but he invited everybody to follow him. That our faith is activated, that we move from believism to followism, right? That we're following Jesus. Right? And he goes on. Let us consider how we may spur one another on, irritate each other, stir it up with each other toward love and good deeds, so that your faith is activated. So make sure you don't give up meeting, as some of you are in the habit of doing. Now, here's what this doesn't mean, and I only bring this up because the pandemic has led to a lot of misunderstanding of the Bible. I think we read this and we think, staring at the back of each other's heads, Rose Church. Right? Lots of people. What? You're not in person? You're going to burn in hell because the Bible says don't give up meeting with each other. But this is not what the author of Hebrews had in mind. The spurring, the irritating, the entangled, the getting each other's business kind of meeting with each other. That's what he's talking about. Don't give that up. Stay relationally connected, embedded, entangled with each other, right? You can't afford, I think the author's saying, to stop meeting together in such a way that you're able to spur each other on, to activate each other's faith, right? That's what he's saying. I mean, this is how we'll sum it up. If your version of Christianity doesn't absolutely require you being in community, you do not understand the Christian faith. That's probably how I'd sum it up. If your version of Christianity doesn't absolutely require you being in community, you don't get it. Right? Because this is a one another thing. It just is. You were never going to mature past the point of needing each other, right? And the people in our lives, they're never going to mature past the point from needing you. I mean, it's how the world is literally divinely designed. And it is how the movement of Jesus is set up. That we would, yes, be this big, giant body, but that we together in our individual little systems of the body are meeting together. We know each other. We hear each other. We're in each other's business. I mean, it's just a bit, listen, I hear 25 years of doing this. I hear lots of stories of how people come to faith, and I hear lots of stories about how people leave the faith. And while there's some common denominators in how people come to faith, there's also some common denominators in terms of how people leave the faith. And the one that just is so consistent is when people start to drift from intentional community, they ultimately will drift from their faith. It just works that way. When we drift from community, we ultimately will end up drifting from our faith. Because in terms of Christianity, our faith is literally rooted in one another. There is no version of Christianity that doesn't include someone else in your business. That's just how it works. And so, is there anyone in your life that is in your business? Is there anyone in your life that has that kind of permission to stir and irritate and be there? And when they see drift, they can speak in to your life. And when you see drift, you can speak in to their life. Or have you perhaps, like some clearly in the first century, why the author of Hebrews is writing, have you given up this practice of meeting together? As much as I love Rose, I love it. I love all the people. I tell you that so much. I love this. People ask me, Forrest, how you doing on Sundays? I'm like, are you kidding me? The people are here, right? I'm all in on this entangled thing, right? But there's limitations to what we can do here. I may be able to someone's clap. There's limitations to what I can do. Amen. That's right. That's right. So why don't you just cut it, dude? Right? Consider me irritated. No, I'm just kidding. This is how we talk about it around here. Circles, not rows. Or at least circles are better than rows. That we turn our chairs to face each other and we know each other's name. Right? One another. Law of Entanglement is what physicists call it. One another is what Paul called it. Either way, Jesus is the one that designed it that way. And again, I don't want to oversell it. Again, we're here. We are here. I have primed the pump. And now you guys are like, well, if I don't join a group, apparently I'm not going to heaven. And I'm going against the grain of the universe. Talk about oversell, Forrest, right? But when we don't, and I don't want to oversell it. When you put yourself out there with a group of people, that really can go sideways. It really can. People can be really annoying and do really horrible things sometimes. It really can not go well. And so just know, as important as I think this is, there's so many factors that, at least from an organizational standpoint, we can't control. And so it may go sideways, and you may need to just keep trying it, right, until it sort of works out. It doesn't mean just because you have a bad group experience doesn't mean groups are bad. It just means you haven't found the right people yet. So here's what we're going to do. On your seats, little reset folders. You open those up. Go ahead, you can open them up. And there's all these groups in there. We're starting a bunch of brand new groups. And listen, some of you may already have your tribe, like your group, the people you're entangled with, the people you're one anothering with, and it's not a formal neighborhood group. Awesome, that's great. You don't need to sign up for one of ours if you already have that space. But if you don't, we're offering all of these groups to help you, because I can't stand up here and talk about all this stuff and then not give you an opportunity or a space to practice it. So this is us saying to you, if you don't have community, or if you're just simply looking for a community that is going to study the Bible and the way of Jesus and all of that stuff, this is that. Now, I will say this. There's a couple things I want to highlight in there, because we've actually, on top of all of those sort of different groups, there's women's groups and men's groups, and there's groups that I think meet at like Barrel House and just talk about the Bible. Right? There's all kinds of groups. But on top of that, we've sort of developed a 3-class kind of growth track during the pandemic that I'd love to see many of you, if you're like, none of these groups work. The first one, and it's not necessarily 3-staged, but it's kind of 3-staged. And the first one, if you're just in a place of like deconstruction and, the only reason you're here is because she makes you come and you've just got questions and you don't really believe in anything, but you want to talk about it. Alpha is that space. You can just come and you can be like, I don't believe in all of it, convince me, whatever. This is the space where you can just come and deconstruct and talk about it all, and Alpha's phenomenal. Now, maybe you don't, okay, someone else, yeah, that's an awesome one. And then you don't have to go to Alpha first, because maybe you're like, I don't need to deconstruct, whatever. But we are a Jesus church, and so we've created a 6-week kind of small group experience that's all about Jesus, the Jesus basics, right? We're just going to talk about who he was, when he lived, what he taught, all of that kind of stuff, really for us to be on the same page together about what it is we mean when we talk about being a Jesus church. So 6 weeks together, lots of conversation, not just a talking head kind of, screaming Jesus facts at you. And then you don't get to sign up for Jesus School because we're starting today, but we did promote it a few weeks ago. But Jesus School is how we teach people to be with Jesus. to just sit in the space with Jesus and to kind of do some interior work. Jesus School's very cool, but don't worry, we do all 3 of these twice a year, and so you'll be able to sign up. So with all of that said, if you're not in a space where you can one another, sign up for a group today, circle what you want, take it out to the tent, and they'll take care of you out there. Does that sound okay? Yeah? Okay. I told you it was longer than the sermon in Hebrews today, but can I pray for us, and then we'll get out of here? Jesus, thanks. Thanks that you wired the world in such a way that we're kind of stuck with each other. And now the only decision we have to make is, are we going to be stuck together in healthy ways that spur each other towards you, or in unhealthy ways? And help us as a community, as a family, as a body, be people who just say yes to our own health, because our individual health unlocks the potential of our collective we call neighborhood. Jesus, we love you.